Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to look at this new moon that's coming up on Monday morning, the 17th, at 11:30 Pacific time. And let's go right away to the chart and take a look at it. So you should be able to see the chart. Whoops. Now, and in this chart we have it's later in the month that the new moons are coming up. Later in the sign that the new moons are coming up at around 25 degrees of Cancer, just 4 minutes away from that, the sun and moon. And then we have, besides this Cancer position of the new moon, we have a very close connection, as you can see, to Neptune at 27 degrees at Pisces, so that's a pretty close trine. There's a very close square to the new planet Eris, which is at 25, so this is a matter of less than half a degree away from a perfect square. So this is a very strong position of Eris, which is feminine warrior energy, one of the new planets beyond Pluto that have only been discovered and named in this 21st century that I've been researching. Besides Neptune, we also have opposition to Pluto, which is a little wider but is still there. And look at this beautiful T-square as well to Haumea, which is another one of these new planets, located at 2857, almost 29 degrees, so very close square between Pluto and Haumea, and that's been true the last few lunations since February. So all these outer planets are really stimulated, including Uranus, which is at 22, so that's 2.5 degrees off of a sextile from the new moon. So the new moon really features all of these outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, including Haumea, and we'll see later that also Makemake is involved in this configuration by a quintile. I was going to mention that a little bit later on. So what can we gather from the fact that we have so much Pluto? It's really in a T-square, which is really a grand cross when you count the opposition between Eris and Haumea. That's a grand cross at the tail end of these cardinal signs. And really Pluto's all about transformation. So we must recognize that we are in a time of great change. We can begin to recognize those changes, and Uranus plays a part in that because it's intuition. Also is parallel to Mercury in this configuration, less than half a degree, and Mercury is square to Jupiter. Mercury being square to Jupiter, parallel to Uranus. These are planets of great brilliance and great insight, especially when combined, and they're in a very wide 11 degree maybe 10.5 degree conjunction with each other. And so this is a time of great thoughtfulness, a time of great innovation, and we just have to turn toward it. It's like our attitude means everything, and we can be in despair. There's a lot to despair about. There's a lot of things going wrong in this culture and the world culture as well. And there's also a lot of things that are hopeful. There's a lot of people everywhere. There's these points of light here and there and here and there and here and there, and they're all connected in the sense that there's a common feeling amongst all these people, these organizations, that are coming along to be anti-racist, anti-income inequality, in favor of treating people kindly, like we talked about in the 60s. That's becoming a question mark of whether that can be viable on the world stage. We have these other notions of war and advantage and taking advantage and lying and cheating as well, and corruption, and we have all of that happening all at the same time, but we can tune into different parts of it, and we can use our discernment to try to see our way through, and also to have a more optimistic attitude, because we all are part of nature. We're the children of this planet in a very humanistic but beautiful way, and we can appreciate the mystical in our life and in the life of this culture, especially when we notice that astrology really works, that astrology can tell us things and show us things that have to do with the movements of the planets, which, even when we say as above, so below, that's a mystical statement, is it not? That we're somehow part of the universe, that the universe is speaking back to us with the positions of these planets, which also combine with the ancient archetypes and the more modern archetypes that we conceive of in terms of Western astrology. So it's all really knitted together and also fantastic. So I wanted to mention that with Pluto and with Neptune also, there is so much transformation, so much discernment of what the truth is, what the reality is, what the fantasy is, how we can have a more beneficial fantasy and enact it in our own lives when we believe enough in what we're doing. And when we turn around and see where the importance is, what do we really stand for? What do we want our gravestone to read in 100 years, right? So that's important to recognize, that we're all up to something, that can be productive. And that we have to take energy in our own lives. We have to take charge and see and turn it around and see what it is that we need to do that's a better, that's a more authentic version of ourselves really going forward. And in this regard, it's also interesting to note that Chiron plays a role in this new moon configuration as well. There's an opposition between Mars and Saturn, very close, forming opposition. So we have a tendency right now to kind of pause in what we're doing. The doing that we're so familiar with in this culture has a sort of a pause point at this moment, and it's the summertime. And we have a chance at this time to go inward, because this opposition between Mars and Saturn makes connections to this 19-degree mark of Chiron, which is also in a kind of a wide square, but not that wide, to the 24-degree mark of the Cancer new moon. So, it's really all happening. And we can look at midpoints too as part of this study when we see what's happening and where things are lining up. But I did want to mention most particularly that these new planets, Haumea and Makemake, which I call nature planets, which have to do with profound connection to nature, including natural law within us, including right action, right relationship, truth-telling, kind of being a mensch, a man or a woman being a human, and what that value is, the value of kindness, the value of treat others as we would like to be treated. It's an old principle, and it's still valid, and we have to recognize that we have the chance to act upon these real strong impulses within us. Not only is Haumea part of this Grand Cross configuration, very prominent, has been prominent since February, and we have been seeing a certain amount of truth-telling coming up. Is that the truth? The questions about the Supreme Court, the questions about this congressman that's been lying about everything he was doing, including where he went to school and what his job was and all those things, including his name even. So that's, and he's refused to step down. So you have the contrast between, well, I can lie and get away with it and you can't stop me, and the idea that no, the culture has to kind of respond to these things. All these lawsuits, all these indictments that are coming down based on what was the truth about the situation in the past, and can we adhere to that truth? Can we come up as a culture and really recognize that there are things that are important to do truthfully and without influence and without lying? So Haumea, as I say, very strong recently, and in this configuration also Makemake, which is at 7 degrees 55 minutes of Libra. That is actually in a biquintile to Jupiter, with a quintile from the new moon to both planets, so that the new moon occupies the midpoint of this biquintile between Jupiter and Makemake. So that's pretty strong too. And we will also want to recognize that there's a lot of thoughtfulness going into this, with, as I say, Mercury and square to Jupiter in parallel to Uranus, so bringing this idea of new ideas, new brilliant propositions forward. So it's a thoughtful time, a time not so much of doing, but of thinking things through and trying to be in a more, in a better connection with ourselves and our internal process. With Chiron so emphasized, it's also our patterns, our habit patterns that may be the result of early trauma, inner wounding. That can be a time to recognize those things and move toward healing them. And those inner wounds can be what blocks us at times from being the person that we really want to be. So it's important to tune into those places, to pay attention to them rather than to try to ignore them. As I've spoken about in the past, as people that have talked about Chiron always speak about, that Chiron, the wounded healer, is about inner wounding and the chance to work with it, because Chiron is also something that changes. It's not a prescription for life, it's a prescription for a process, which can result in a great treasure within you of compassion when you can work through those things. So it's all happening, it's all very significant. And it does involve these new planets. And I do want to mention that the evidence keeps piling up for this connection that I feel between Haumea and Makemake and a sort of a natural law. If you know anything about Michael Franti, I just ran across his chart this morning, so I decided to show it. He's a wonderful human. He's always compassionate. His lyrics are fantastic. I think it was Burning Spear was the name of his group. I'm not sure if he's solo now or what, but he's always been a real human person and a real kind person. And he's just that he oozes compassion, and that's who he is. He's strong. He's not an namby-pamby, but he's also strong in his principle, and strong that he wants to exhibit truthfulness about the situation and about the inequalities, about the way we have to move past those divisions in our society. And I want to show you his chart, which is right here. And in this chart, you can see that the position of both Haumea and Makemake is very emphasized. Haumea is at 4 degrees of Virgo, and at 1 degree and 2 degrees, almost 3, of Taurus, we have this very strong Sun-Mars conjunction in the top of the chart. So he's a doer, he's out there making things happen, and it's closely trine to this position of Haumea. Makemake is also in his first house, and that is making aspects to these planets here in the 9th. It makes an angle to Venus on the one hand, also to this Saturn-Chiron conjunction in the 9th house, and also, especially if you consider the midpoint, which is close to 7 degrees between Mercury and Eris, so that he's a thoughtful person, using his words, using his presence. And you would look for Neptune also, by the way, which does connect to his Venus, connects to his Chiron, because Neptune refers to music. Neptune, especially with Mercury, refers to music. So, and lyrics, poetry. So it's all very characteristic. This is what I expect. When I see somebody like Michael Franti, I expect to see a strong position of Haumea, a strong position of Makemake in the chart. And of course, activist describes him to the T. He's always trying to make a difference, and that's what he's up to. That's what his whole thing is about. And it's in the first house. We do have his time. Makemake in the first house in Leo, close to his ascendant, and that ascendant is completely square his sun position, so that's a lot of energy there to make things happen too. And then the trine to Haumea is just so characteristic. So these are things I find routinely. If this is the only chart I'd ever found like that, it wouldn't be worth mentioning it to you, because it would be, who knows, right? But over and over and over again, the chart of Greta Thunberg, who is an activist, shows very strong Eris in a grand trine with Pluto and Jupiter. Meanwhile, also Eris, the focal point of a Yod from Mars, and Makemake being an environmental activist archetype. So it's all there when you look for it. And I think it's fascinating that these new planets have come along when they have in this part of the 21st century, when we are really kind of trying to size things up and see which way to go. And things are getting more dire. The pressure is upon us as a society to make changes, to ameliorate climate change, which is otherwise going to kill the planet, or at least kill our participation in the planet by the temperature rises. So that's the basis. It's all happening. It's all there for us. And it's all up to us. We ask who's responsible for the changes? Each one of us. So let me transition back. And that's what I have to share with you today. I mean, these new moon configurations are so characteristic. They're really helpful in providing an objective correlation to what's going on within us that we can really tune into. And it's just so important. It's never been more important. So this decade is a pivotal decade. we are in a pivotal summertime period in relating to that. And we just have to take ourselves seriously and take the planet seriously and take our obligation and our calling to be the best people that we can be, to be the most authentic person, the most authentic version of ourselves that we can muster. So good luck with that. Talk to you soon. Bye now.